Welcome back. Continuing our discussion of Linux stack buffer overflows, we have our two versions of our program. One of them has stack buffer protection, and the other one does not. So we're going to run both of these in GDB GNU debugger, and we're going to start with the one that does not have stack buffer overflow protection. So I'll type GDB, and then I will run it against Linux stack NSP. And here it is. Now, some of you may not be familiar with GDB. GDB is a very powerful debugger. It is also a command line oriented debugger. Now, you can get various GUI overlays for GDB, so there are chances to run it within a graphical environment. In this video, we will just stick with the command line version of GDB. It's really not that hard to use once you get used to it, but it does take a little while in order to learn it. Now, the first thing I want you to notice is it said reading symbols from Linux stack NSP. And the reason it did that, we compiled our program with debugging information. So that will help us when we look at this program. We're not going to be looking at raw assembly code here. We'll be able to look at C code. So you're here at a command prompt and you don't know what to do. And it tells you you can type help in order to get help. So if I type help, you'll see that there are various basic commands. And if I want to drill down onto some of these commands, I can type help followed by the name of the command, and it will tell me what to do. So for example, maybe I wanted to have some help on breakpoints, and this will tell me a little bit more about those. I can also get help on a particular command. So one command that we'll use quite a bit is called info. So I can say help on info, and then it tells me there are quite a few things that I can get information on. I can get information on an address, on registers, arguments, breakpoints, checkpoints, exceptions, extensions, files, functions, and you see that there's even more information here. So what are some of the functions in my program? Or what are some of the variables in my program? So let's start with the variables. If I type info variables, you'll see here are all of the defined variables, and there aren't any. And here are the ones without debugging symbols. Here's what this is about. I don't have any global variables in this program. That's why I don't have any defined variables here. And all of these other variables, these are just the overhead of having a program. So when you compile even a simple C program like this, it drags in a whole bunch of library code and it defines a bunch of things. And that's what we see here. I can get information on the functions. So if I type info functions, it will tell me here are the functions that have defined functions with debugging symbols. Notice that I have function and main, and everything else has no debugging information. This is all the overhead of having my program. So all of these other functions here, I don't have any debugging symbols because I'm having to go outside of my program, which I compiled with debugging, in order to get that information. I can also get information on a specific function and its variables. So if I type, for example, info scope function, it will tell me about the variables that are in scope in that function. I can list my program. If I just type list, I see my program starting at line 1. I can give it a line number as well. I can say, please list from 1. And another thing that I can do is just hit enter if I want to repeat the last command. In this case, the last command was list. So if I hit enter again, it lists the rest of my program. If I want to run a program and give it some arguments, that's pretty easy. I just type run and I give it some parameters. So I'll give it just 8 characters and it says your program exited normally. What if I give it too many parameters? I can tell it, all right, I want to run with 16. Let's see how that goes. And it says program received seg v segmentation fault. So that didn't work terribly well for me. it's a little bit difficult to see what happened if I just run this program straight through. So what do I want to do to change that? I want to set some breakpoints. And there are a couple of ways that I can set a breakpoint. One way is that I can type break and then the name of a function. So I can say break main. And another way, I can say break and then give it a line number. So I want to break on line 9, please. And notice it says I set this breakpoint. If I do info on breakpoints, it tells me here are the 2 breakpoints that you set. If I decide I don't want that breakpoint anymore, so maybe I don't want the one at main, I can just type disable 1. Now, if I rerun my info break, and by the way, there is command history in GDB, so I can just hit my up arrow a couple times and notice what's happened here. Now it says enabled is set to N for no for my first breakpoint. If I want to run a program with a breakpoint, I can do it just like this. I can rerun my program. I'll use my command history here. And it says the program began debugging. Should I start it again from the beginning? Yes, please. And it says I reached the breakpoint. If I want to continue my program, I can do so by typing continue. I can shorten that to cont, and it will go until it hits another breakpoint or the program exits. I can also type step, and step will step forward 1 line. And again, I can hit enter and step through it this way, or I can just type cont, and once again, my program has crashed. We're going to take a brief break, and when we come back, we will continue our discussion of stack buffer overflows on Linux.